QMB3200 and I just wanted to point out a couple things when we are working with qualitative variables. So in this particular problem we have a couple of independent quantitative variables, so you can see x1 and x sub 2, and then we also have a qualitative variable that we have three different categories or three different classifications. So we have h equals high, m equals medium, and l equals low. So it tells us what we should assign as a 1 for high or a 1 for medium. If you are doing your own research and constructing these variables yourself, it doesn't matter how you assign them. It's completely up to you as long as it's consistent through the process. But in the problem, it's telling us to let the first condition be x sub 3 and to assign a 1 to high for that variable. And then for condition 2, we want the dummy variable to be a 1 for medium. So it's best in this case when we have more than two options for the dummy variable as opposed to 3 or more. So if a more basic example with dummy variables might be gender, so we might assign a 0 to males and a 1 to females. That's a lot easier to work with. When we have 3 or more categories, then it's a little bit more of a process to make sure that we have the application correct in the setup of our data table. So first, it's best to just construct a brief dummy variable table so that we can make sure that we are not entering anything incorrectly when it comes time to load the variable data into the regression. So with this particular problem, we again are assigning 1 to high for condition 1, which is our x sub 3, and 1 as the medium for condition 2, or x sub 4. So if we have 1 as condition 1, then condition 2 automatically be 0, because that's not applicable. It's high as opposed to medium or low. And for medium, if we have obviously the 1 in condition 2, which is our x sub 4, then naturally the condition 1 would be a 0. So think about how this applies to the regression equation. Here's just an example equation here. If x sub 3 refers to high, x sub 4 refers to medium, then a 1 here for the x sub 3 would be multiplied times the coefficient b sub 3, and we'd have that result. X sub 4 in this case would not be applicable because it would be 0. So this times b sub 4 times x sub 4 would automatically be 0, and that would be left out of the equation result. So keep in mind also that the base case is always the one that's labeled 0, 0. So in this case, condition 1 and condition 2 are both 0. And again, this is our base case, and this is what we will interpret against when it comes time to review our coefficient outputs from the regression. So whatever our b sub 3 is coefficient and b sub 4 coefficient, these figures, b sub 3 and b sub 4, are the figures that we compare to the base case when we do the interpretation. So very important that we're not comparing high to medium or medium to high, we're comparing high to low and medium to low. Okay, so once we have the variables constructed correctly as far as how they are identified as x sub 3 and x sub 4, then we can make sure that we put appropriate labels to the conditions for each observation. So for example, this is the data table here, y being our dependent variable, and these are the conditions that are associated with each observation. So with condition L, this particular column is not included in the regression data. It is just simply a label so that we can identify the zeros and ones that go with that condition. So being that this is a low condition, that's related to 0, 0 for condition 1 and condition 2. And the next one we have is medium, which be related to 0 for condition 1 and 1 for condition 2. And then here's an example of high, where we have 1 as for the condition 1 and 0 for the condition 2. So moving on down the table, they're applied appropriately based on the condition in this column. And then when it comes time to running the regression equation, or the regression in whether it's data analysis toolpack or Excel stat, then our independent variables will be x sub 1 all the way through x sub 4. So once again, we do not include the condition column here as part of the independent variables in the regression. And one thing to note about Excel is that we need to have these columns adjoining. So for example, if we had this condition column here, if this was split in the middle here, so if we had the condition in column D and then condition 1, condition 2 moved over to E and F, we'd have kind of a break in between the data columns that we need. And for Excel, we really need to actually have them adjoining or connected together. So that's why I have this condition column here on the end as just my labels, and I have the condition 1 x3 variable, condition 2 x4 variable here, so they're next to the quantitative independent variables that we need. So we need all 4, and we need, in short, for them just to be connected together to properly run the regression in Excel. So from here on out, you should be able to run the regression with the data analysis toolpack or Excel stat, and hopefully this helps again to identify and properly label the dummy variable for this particular problem.